The PPE gown must be worn whenever there is a potential for exposure to blood, bloody fluids, or other infectious materials by the 3S. Spray, splash, and splatter.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing the industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now, turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
On this episode of Beyond Clean, we are going to be speaking with Keisha Brock, CEO at Eyes to See Management and Consulting LLC. And Hank, again, love the title, comes down to the gown. Beautiful stuff for our season on PPE.
We're getting fashionable. We're putting together our outfit for decontam. And, the gown is a central theme of that. Boys and girls, we're going to be talking about how to get dressed up the right way in the way that keeps you safe through hours and hours of all that manual cleaning, splashing, rinsing, and soaking. So, yeah, tune in. If you work in decontam, you're going to want to make sure that you got your gown down. So let's make it happen today with Keisha.
Oh, we're going to have way too much fun with this. Great title, Hank. We're going to be right back. Stay with us. Just a short break. I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From 17 Studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Today we have Keisha Brock joining us. She's the CEO of Eyes to See Management and Consulting LLC, and we're talking all about PPE. And I love the title of this episode, Hank. Ready for reprocessing? It comes down to the gown. So if you're down with a gown, this is the episode for you. Keisha, very nice to have you today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Why don't you tell everybody out there a little bit about your background? And specifically, you're the CEO of your own company. So we love talking to other entrepreneurs, people who kind of take their destiny in their own hands, and would love to hear how you kind of made that leap as you talk about your experience in SPD.
I have over 30 years of experience in the healthcare industry, been managing operating rooms and managing SPD departments for the last 25 years. I was in the Air Force as a surgical tech. And, when you're in the service and you have to do both SPD and sterile processing and operating room. So I've been in this field for a very long time. I've done every job in SPD, from the technician to the manager to the educator. And then I've actually ran the day-to-day operations in the OR, doing statistics, productivity, capital expenditure requests. So it came to the point where I had everyone coming to me asking me questions. Keisha, what you think about this? What you think about that? And I was like, all of you all are asking me questions. Why don't I start helping other people? So that's what it is. We're looking to bridge the gap between the OR and SPD, build trust, and we come in and help, streamline your operations and help you where you're having problems and turn those problems into opportunities.
There may be some audience members that recognize your name from Beyond Clean. We had an article come out recently about how to deal with the chemotherapy and instruments, one of those common questions that we get out there in the space today. So if you haven't read it yet, go check that out. That's on the Beyond Clean blog. And Keisha, you also won an award here in 2023. Do you want to mention that real quick before we get into that? Yeah, we won the same award there. So yeah. Why don't you tell the audience what that was about?
SterilWare, we were recognized by SterilWare of being innovative and working in the sterile processing industry. So Charlie, he told us his story about how he came to invent sterile aware, and he recognized us for our work in sterile processing. It was a great honor.
Yeah, it's a lot to do with the superstars, I think they call them, out there in sterile processing. Folks that are pushing the needle, like Justin said. So great award. Congratulations again on that accomplishment. To kind of set this up, I want to start with a warm-up question here. We are going to be talking about gowns. And, this is kind of a weird question, but it was the best warm-up one that I could get. And it's about matching, right? So when we think about gowns, you don't necessarily think about the PPE gowns. You're thinking about maybe evening wear. I don't know a lot about fashion, but I know my wife would tell me when you're planning your outfits, you need to be thinking about, hey, do things match? So when you're getting dressed up in your PPE, has it crossed your mind? Do you ever notice, hey, my gown actually does not match my shoe covers? Or do you even care about those kinds of things?
I actually don't care, but I've always been a hodgepodge type of person. So everything has actually been a hodgepodge of everything. My mask to my gown to my gloves to my shoe covers, they're all different colors. So I'm just a hodgepodge.
I love it. Well, we're starting to see in the industry today, this is kind of a side topic, but there's companies out there that are coming out with some custom colors, custom PPE out there. And that's definitely a new thing. And I think, it's kind of interesting that you see some of that, right? That we at least have some options today. But yeah, you're right. It's just kind of whatever they hand you, that's what you're putting on. And
as long as it works. Yes.
That's right. They're not asking, does it look good? So speaking of working, let's set the stage here with the basics of this gown topic. So when folks come into the industry, maybe as a new technician, or maybe you've been putting on gowns every day for 20 years, but you've never really stopped to say, what's the purpose of this thing? Can you kind of give us that lay of the land right now?
Okay. The purpose of the gown is a garment that is used to protect the end user. And the gowns can actually be differentiated in 3 different ways: by classification, by level, and by critical areas. OSHA states that the gown selected must not permit blood or any potential hazardous or infectious materials to pass through to the person's work clothes, street clothes, undergarments, skin, eyes, mouth, or other mucous membranes under normal conditions of use and for the duration of time in which the personal equipment was being used. The PPE gown must be worn whenever there is a potential for exposure to blood, bloody fluids, or other infectious materials by the 3 S's: spray, splash, and splatter. So the FDA actually differentiates the classifications of the gowns. There's 3 classifications. It's class 1 to class 3. The FDA says that the surgical gowns is actually a class 2 medical device. And then there's different levels that the gowns are actually differentiated to. There's level 1, that's minimal risk, and that's like a standard isolation gown that you may wear if you go on the floor somewhere in a health facility. There's level 2, which is a low risk gown using for suture in the ICUs or pathology lab. Then there's level 3, that's a moderate risk, and that's used for arterial lines when you're doing blood draws in the emergency room for some trauma cases. Then there's a level 4 gown, and that's used during long fluid invasive procedures and in surgery. Also, the gown is differentiated by the critical zones. There's 4 critical zones: A, B, C, D. A is your chest area. B is your forearms. C is the top and the bottom of your gown, and D is the back of your gown. Now, this is very important. Depending on your work being performed, a gown, which is a PPE, a personal protective equipment, is the gown for decontamination must be a level 3 or a level 4, long sleeved, impervious, fluid proof, or fluid resistant gown or jumpsuit, not an apron. An apron can be used in conjunction with those, but it can't be used alone. And also, the gown that you're using in the SPD area must protect in the 3 zones, A, B, and C.
Wow.
I never knew that.
You took us to school.
That is all brand new information for me.
That is awesome. Here like, I'm going to have to listen to this again because you threw down a lot of information in a short amount of time. But like Justin said, a lot of that I had never heard all the different breakdowns, right? Like you got the FDA, like what class of an FDA clearance it is. You got the grading of the gown. And even at the beginning, like you kind of talked about, hey, like this gown, the FDA says this gown has to work the entire time that you're going to be wearing it, right? So
Exactly.
if it's impervious, for the first 30 minutes, but you're at decontam for 4 hours, that's not quite checking the box that, that design needs to check. So that's a terrific intro there. And, you kind of brought up the apron question. This gets into my next question in the types of gowns, because you mentioned there's gowns, that protect your sleeves, that also protect your back. I know that's going to be a topic that we're going to talk about in this season with the recent splash study that came out and all the information around that, but can you speak to, in the average sterile processing department, or maybe even like endo department, the types of gowns that are most common for folks to see out there today?
There's medical gowns, there's surgical gowns, and there's isolation gowns. There's a whole plethora of companies out here that actually have gowns. And I think it's during COVID when we really started paying attention to different levels. Because I can be honest with you, I didn't realize like the masks, I didn't realize that they had different levels. But now we're paying attention to the use of a gown, what protections it gives and the use of it. So like in the endo area, you may see people wearing aprons, which is unacceptable because their sleeves are out. So it's not giving you those 3 zones of protection. You see some people wearing the plastic gowns that have the thumbprints, but I've noticed over there has a little thumb things that you put in your little plastic gowns, but I've noticed over the years that the plastic is getting thinner and thinner and thinner. So it doesn't provide adequate protection. So now we're actually looking at what is the use of the gown? Is it giving you adequate protection? And also, is it the correct size? One size does not fit all. And it used to be when you go into decontam, you had one gown, one size, and it was supposed to fit everyone. Now we need to be more conscious and do our homework and make sure that the gown is actually providing the protection that it should.
All right, so I've got a follow-up question, and I do have a horse in this race, but I'll wait and tell you afterwards. What are your thoughts, or maybe your personal thoughts, because I'm clearly going to share mine, on single-use versus reusable gowns?
Okay. My personal, I prefer single-use versus reusable because I found that reusable are usually not consistent or reliable. I've received reusable gowns that have been missing the straps. They've had holes in them. They had tears. And I would rather have a single-use gown that I can depend on each time that's going to give me the protections that I need versus stressing.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I definitely prefer to move towards reusable in many things just due to, the cost to, the facility and the environment, which is why I believe in reprocessing. Because if every instrument was single use, that'd be an enormous amount of waste and enormous amount of cost that would just tack up over time. It's going somewhere. But when it comes to gowns, I'm with you. Single use all the way.
Exactly. And they're hot. The reusable ones that I've come into contact with, they're usually hot. They used to have the old Vortex ones. They were beautiful, but they're hot. And the older I get, the hotter I get.
So let's talk about
hotter as in heat.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to leave that up to interpretation for the audience, right?
and now we're back to whether or not your PPE is matching. But so, Keicha, I want to ask you this one too, and I think this is really important. And I know there's a lot of focus, not just with gowns, but just PPE in general in surgical services, like how you put this on, how you take it off. It's all about maintaining the sterile field. We don't really have that sterile field concept in sterile processing, but I think the reasons for how you don and doff your PPE are very similar, the same. They're not just about protecting the sterile field. It's also about protecting our personal selves and not transmitting microbes or causing infections, etc., to coworkers and contaminating other surfaces. So can you talk about sort of the stage and process of donning and doffing these gowns and things that people forget all the time that they really need, like a detail that they really shouldn't lose sight of when they're just doing something like this repetitively every day. They're busy and they're just trying to get to the next thing they have to do.
Well, one of the things now that we're focusing on in sterile processing with the gowns is when you're donning your gown, you first have to make sure that it's providing adequate protections, because I'm going to keep saying this over and over again, and it's the correct size. Also, when you're putting on your gown, you want to make sure that once you've donned your gown on, that your cuffs are actually inside of the cuff of your glove, that your glove is actually covering the whole entire up to your forearms. If you have a glove that's long enough that it's actually covering your forearm of the gown. When you're doffing the gown, it is extremely important that if you haven't double gloved, usually I'm a scrub tech, so I double glove on everything. But if you haven't double gloved, when you are removing your gown, the standard says that your glove should already have been removed. So when you're removing your gown, you should be removing it. If you haven't double gloved, you shouldn't have your gloves on, your dirty gloves that you've been using through the entire time that you're cleaning your instruments. And when you're using it, you're going to pull from your shoulders, pull down, and then you're going to pull that outside into the inside. So instead of having the dirty part that you've been using that your hands are touching, you're actually touching the inside of the gown, and then you're going to roll it up and discard and wash your hands.
Yeah, that process I know because I've done it a million times, right? Like, it sounds simple. This is what you do. But inevitably, like, you forgot to untie something, or there's something stuck somewhere, or it jostled around. And so, yeah, like, to be in the moment and not trying to rush out like, hey, is it break time or it's lunchtime or it's go home time, and I'm just going to rip this thing off like Hulk Hogan and then, get on with my day. Like, that's where that contamination happens, right? That Justin is referring to. So, keeping that front and center, like you said, what's the process and how does the process differ depending on your glove situation as you described? I love those takeaways. Speaking of gloves, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the perennial challenges and, frustrations in the technician side of things is, hey, we got our hands in water all shift back there in decon. If we're compliantly brushing below the surface of the water as we should be, if we're soaking compliantly, we're going to be getting exposure to the gloves and gowns. And oftentimes you get that water penetration into your gloves, which, I can't think of anything much dirtier than decontaminated water that you're soaking in, besides maybe just, straight like bodily fluids. What are your thoughts on that challenge? Is there a way, is there a process in the donning of this PPE, specifically as it relates to gowns, that you've seen be more successful than others? Do you have any other solutions out there for that problem that you would like to share?
Usually, if you get the ones with the thumb holes, those usually try to keep your gown down. But I'm going to be honest, I haven't found anything that stops us from getting water. I always have water. When I go underwater, when I put my gloves in, I'm always getting water penetration. And then they haven't made a glove that's long enough. I know they have some that come up to the middle of your forearm, but I think you need to make a glove that comes up to my elbow. If you give me a glove that comes up to my elbow, maybe then I won't get water penetration. But currently, and I
actually used to distribute some about 8 years ago with a company I was with, and it went up over the elbows. But the mill was only like 4, I think. So it wasn't really thick. So the reason it didn't get a lot of adoption is because you're working with instruments that might be sharp. They wanted a thicker, mill glove, and then take these and put them over that glove and go all the way up. And I think one of the reasons it wasn't adopted was because it was an extra. Like, if it had been a thicker mill and it replaced it, they might have taken a little bit extra cost, but it was just all added cost. So I didn't see an enormous amount of adoption. The unfortunate thing was it really did solve that issue of, water getting down in there.
But if you double glove,
then this would not be any more. It'd be the same as if you're regularly. And the thing is, you could have designed it with a thicker mill, but then it would have been impossible to pull it up your arm and over your elbow. So the reason it was a thinner mill was so that you could actually put it on. If you think about like Ted hose and trying to get them on your legs, all the way up, it's the same kind of concept. It's hard to do if they're if they're really thick and not so flexible.
If you look at sterile gloves that you use in surgical, the sterile gloves, they have them where they come up higher. There's a way to do it. It's just someone has to actually put the time in it and do it. There's a way, I think, with the materials that we have out here that we can do it. And I think that if someone just takes the time and do it, there would be a lot of people that would be extremely happy. Because once you get fluid in your gown or your glove, you're sitting there like, oh my God.
Yeah.
What's in
what did
this
you
water?
get exposed to?
Yes,
And,
exactly.
right.
Did I have any open cuts? You know?
Yep. That's exactly.
And it's not just about washing your hands because it's all the way up and down. Like, do you need to take a shower at that point? It's,
Am I really
like, that's a legitimate
right
thought.
Yeah, exactly. You're itching now. Is that from the water?
Well, I believe we've got a glove episode scheduled for this season too, so we'll have to continue that conversation on that interview as well. But I absolutely love throwing down the gauntlet to other innovators out there that are listening to this podcast, because we got a lot of them that, you know, they're looking for ideas. They're out there trying to do the things. Like, let's throw the ideas out and say, hey, somebody go make this, because we don't see it yet. And
did you use the term gauntlet intentionally?
No.
I mean, it's basically a glove.
Oh, is it? I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Look at you, Justin, showing off your...
I better be right. I'm fact-checking right now.
Okay, yeah. Do some Google, and I'll ask the next question here. So, in terms of best practices, we've talked about a lot already, like around, you know, donning, doffing, and just, you know, having the right equipment. Like, not all these gowns are created equal. It's not the same thing as an apron, and on and on. Outside of that, is there anything else in an episode about gowns that you would want to make sure that we check the box on, that people are thinking about tomorrow when they go back into their department?
Just remember to check the package insert and read exactly what type of protections. Because in the past, I remember getting gowns and I just thought, oh, this is a gown, I'm going to put it on. It must be adequate. But now we must trust. What do they say? Trust but verify. Check your package insert to make sure that it's giving you the adequate protections. And as leaders in SPD, it is your responsibility to make sure that you're reading and making sure that that gown that you're using, that you're giving your staff, it adequately protects them. And it's doing the correct levels, the correct zones, and everything. So it's your responsibility. I would just say read your package insert and make sure, because all gowns are not created equal.
All right, Keisha, this was an excellent interview. Really enjoyed it. Want you to know that my Google search did turn up that I was correct. It's an armored glove. So if you think of the days of jousting, it was when, you know, the jouster would take their glove off and throw it on the ground. And then that was the challenge. So I think it's really ironic that we were talking about gloves.
Wow.
And
okay,
you used
Hank,
that
go
phrase.
ahead. Gauntlet.
So
Okay.
nice job. Yeah.
Got it.
I guarantee you that gets worked into a title of an episode at some point, maybe even this season. But Keicha, how can people follow you on social media? I see you're active there. They, you know, if they want to reach out to you and get connected, like, where can they find you? What's the best way to reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn under my name, Keisha Brock. I'm on LinkedIn also under Eyes to See Management and Consultants. I'm on Instagram on Eyes to See MC. We have a website, www.eyes2cmanagementconsulting.com. Email kbrock@eyes2cmanagementconsulting.com. Or you can use the old-fashioned phone and call me at 1-800-334-1739.
Nice. You laid that down perfectly. Very well done. So I really enjoyed this episode. It was a ton of fun. Right off the bat, you taught me some things I had absolutely no idea about. So thank you for bringing just that detail to the table today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
That was Keisha Brock, CEO at Eyes to See Management and Consulting LLC. And Hank, great interview. Really enjoyed this one. I don't really know what to say other than you threw the gauntlet down. So when we do the episode on gloves this season, that better carry over.
Yeah, I mean, I was just like you, Justin, like sitting there with my notepad and saying, yep, didn't know that. I wish someone would have told me that, 10 years ago. So this is going to be one of those episodes I can already tell folks are going to come back to Again and again, they're going to work it into their orientation. They may even put it into some department in services just to get the juices flowing and get people asking questions about their gowns. The one thing, though, that I do want to highlight is she mentioned the gown sizes. That's an important thing that we didn't dive into too deep, but even if you have the right gowns, if you don't have the right sizes for your staff members, you're not going to get that full coverage that we've been talking about today. So make sure and add that to your checkbox in addition to everything else.
All right, everybody. That's it for this episode. We've got many more coming this season. Lots of great conversations to be had around PPE. And I do want to remind you to download the smartphone app for iPhone or Android. That's our preference. Hank's preference is iPhone. My preference is Android. We talk about that often. It's the battleground here on the Beyond Clean podcast. But if you don't want to download the smartphone app, you can certainly find us on all the different podcast applications like Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts, and many others. If you don't see us right there, just search for the Beyond Clean podcast on whatever your favorite podcast app is, and you will find us. Also, we really want you to engage with us on LinkedIn. You don't just hear these episodes in your podcast app. You'll see postings on LinkedIn and Facebook, and we like to get your feedback and thoughts on the episode. Maybe you learned something like I did today. Would love to hear about it in the comments section. Or if you think that you learned something, but you don't really want to post anything in terms of comments, just go ahead and share that post out so that others can get the information as well. And then finally, one way to reach us, if you've got ideas or feedback, but you want to connect with us directly, but more in a private way, you can send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We'd love to hear from you. On behalf of Hank and myself, thanks for listening to Beyond Clean, and keep fighting dirty.